Skinny for Friday, July 25th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined by my colleague, Ray Roa, the editor-in-chief with Creative Loafing newspaper. Thank you so much for joining us, and good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Mitch. How's it going today?
Great to see you. We have a really good show this morning here. We're excited about that. By the way, thank you for tuning into the Skinny. Thanks for listeners who called in last Saturday in our emergency fundraiser where the station raised an astounding $280,000. This is, of course, set up after we lost funding from both the federal government, the rescission bill, of course, you might have heard about, cutting funding to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and also of Governor Ron DeSantis, who originally put money in the budget for WMNF and then took it out when he put his budget together and his vetoes last month. So you were here for part of that.
I was here, yeah. I pitched Saturday evening with Cheryl Mogul on the Saturday Soulful Soiree, and I've been volunteering here since high school, and I've never been a part of anything like that. It was pretty incredible. The energy was wild.
Yeah, it's so great. Our listeners are incredible. And so we've got, again, like I said, we have an exciting show for you this morning. Coming up a little later in the hour, we're going to have former federal prosecutor Mike Gordon, who prosecuted some of the most notorious people involved in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol in 2021. He was recently fired by U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi for no apparent reason. Now he is suing the Trump administration. He's going to be in studio later this hour, and we'll be here talking to him about that. But first, David Jolly right now. He, of course, is the only major candidate to file so far for the Democratic nomination for governor in Florida in 2026, and he is with us via Zoom. Good morning, David.
Hey, good morning, guys. Good to be with you.
Great to have you here with us. And just for our listeners, if you're not completely familiar with David Jolly, we assume you might be. But anyway, David, of course, just became a Democrat earlier this year after being a political independent for the past 7 years. He was elected as a Republican representing Pinellas County in Congress twice, both in 2014 and twice in, I guess, 2014, right? Early that year and then later on.
Right.
Yeah, and then, of course, there was redistricting in 2015, and so he lost his bid for election in 2016 to Democrat Charlie Crist, and he has been very much involved in public affairs since then, as a pundit for MSNBC for many years, been a political independent, now a Democrat, and now running for governor. So first time we've had you on the Skinny, David, since you were officially a candidate. We know you were on John Dingfelder's show last month. I know you've been out well before you officially announced your candidacy, speaking to groups around the state. How's that going right now?
It's going very well, Mitch. And Ray, let me start with the easiest softball of all. If I get elected governor, we will return funding to public broadcasting. How about that? Okay. Let's put that marker down right now. Listen, this has been a very affirming call it a tour around the state. That might be a little generous, but yes, for the last 4 or 5 months, I guess, I've kind of been out on the town hall circuit. You know, I spent a fair amount of time last year doing my part to support what I call the Democratic Coalition, led by the Democratic Party, but doing a lot of the county party galas or annual dinners, but really started in earnest this year with a town hall tour. And look, we are in the midst of a national change environment. It is sweeping the country. It is sweeping Florida. We also are in the midst of an affordability crisis, a generational affordability crisis in the state of Florida. So between our national politics, where our leadership seems to be representing only a minority of America's voters with the direction that the president seems to be taking us, and then certainly in the state, where our elected Republican supermajority is turning a deaf ear to where the majority of the state is, right? You can look at our constitutional amendments that continue to get more than 50% of Florida voter support, but Republicans turn their back to that. I just think we're in the midst of a remarkable change environment. And as a Democrat, I believe we have an opportunity to win the governorship for the first time in, over 25 years.
Well, it's certainly going to be formidable with the voter registration disadvantage for Democrats right now, but we can get into that a little later. I want to talk about the fact, of course, you are a new Democrat, and I think you knew you were going to confront this, and that is, as a new Democrat, you certainly, as a Republican, voted certain ways back, and I'm going to bring up the issue of abortion rights specifically. That has become an issue in the last few weeks here, dueling op-eds in the Miami Herald, where people have been looking at your record on abortion rights. And so let's see. So there was an op-ed in the Miami Herald, I guess it was earlier this month, by Anna Hockhammer, the executive director of the Florida Women's Coalition. And let me just quote her. She said, talking about your position now, which you are espousing a pro-Roe position, as it were, on abortion rights. But she writes that this position marks a shift from when Jolly was a Republican in Congress more than 11 years ago. At the time, Jolly signed under the Life at Conception Act that would have given legal rights to a fertilized egg and voted in favor of limiting most abortions to 20 weeks. He also led a measure to redirect federal funding from Planned Parenthood. He bucked his party in 2015 as a lone Republican to vote against creating a fourth panel that would look into Planned Parenthood's handling of fetal tissue remains. We do know that. And then, of course, we saw, I think it was just last weekend, a group of pro-choice Democratic women who are supporting you. That included former Congresswoman Donna Shalala and Barbara Jarecki, the former head of Planned Parenthood for Southwest and Central Florida. But you know this, David, right? Whether it's on abortion rights or some other issues, that now that you're, you have a different perspective here, that some people, in this case, abortion rights supporters, are going to have an issue with this. So how do you react to all that?
Sure. Of course. Look, change is part of my journey. Change is one of the themes of this campaign, and I'm proud of my journey. I think most voters have changed on issues here or there. Some have hardened their positions. Some have moved very far, as I have. Let's start with some very top-line things and then get into this notion of change. Top line it. I voted for Amendment 4. I support Amendment 4. As governor, I would work to enact Amendment 4 into statute. Just because it failed at the 60% threshold for a constitutional amendment doesn't mean that a governor and legislature can't fight for it. I am against restrictions like waiting periods and sonogram requirements and so forth, and I would veto any additional restrictions Republicans would send our way. This is not new, but it is not where I was 12 years ago. Let's say it's happened in the last maybe 5 years. So let's talk about, and let me top line something else. I am pleased that some of the largest backers and proponents of Amendment 4, leading female advocates for reproductive freedom in Florida, have endorsed our campaign and are supporting us. In that article, you mentioned the former longtime head of Planned Parenthood in Southwest Florida is mentioned as someone who's endorsed. The former national chair of Planned Parenthood Action Committee nationally has endorsed this campaign and is excited we may have a pro-choice governor. So listen, I think people who sometimes in politics, largely you have good faith actors, but sometimes you have some bad faith actors that just want to cause trouble. I think there's a little bit of both going on in this case. What I would tell you, though, let's talk about my journey, because it is true. Look, I was a Bush 41 Republican, right? I was never a good enough Republican, but Democrats didn't need me. I supported marriage equality, climate science, gun control, campaign finance reform. And yes, on the issue of reproductive freedom, I'll very briefly share my journey. I come from a place of deep Christian faith. Now, I don't take that faith into my politics, but there was a time when I did, and I was wrong to do so. When I first got elected to Congress, I was applying my faith teachings to the constitutional question of reproductive freedom, and I was wrong to do that. And in my 3 years in Congress, you could watch my journey. The critics who mentioned that I offered legislation to move money from Planned Parenthood, that was actually the compromise when Republicans were trying to defund it entirely, defund reproductive care. So my proposal was a 1-year proposal to say, okay, if we're attacking Republicans or attacking Planned Parenthood, let's at least move that money to community health centers that would continue to provide reproductive care in communities that needed it. Republicans were just trying to cut $400 million. I was actually trying to continue reproductive care. And then, yes, I became the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. I eventually, by 16, 17, got to a place where I supported the Roe-Casey framework. And that's where I have been ever since, and certainly in a post-Dobbs environment, I think it's more important than ever. So return where we started with. I supported Amendment 4. I would work to enact it into statute. I think the most important thing for Democrats in this environment is, do we want to win and possibly elect the first pro-choice governor in over 2 decades? I think that's where we should be. The criticism should be directed at Byron Donalds right now, someone who supports the 6-week ban.
Okay, and one other question, again, that's David Jolly, who's running for the Democratic nomination for governor in Florida next year. One other question before we look forward, and going back to your record, and that is on the Affordable Care Act. Chris Mitchell, sure, a Democrat, he put out on Facebook a comment recently, and one of the things he said that he had an issue with you on was you voting to remove 40 million Americans from their health care by repealing Obamacare. Is that accurate?
Oh, I'm sure. So I don't know if we had a direct repeal vote when I was in Congress, but what happens in Congress is repeal gets tucked into a lot. And so sure, I'm sure I cast votes in that favor. Look, let's say Republicans tried it 60 times. I got elected probably after the first 40. So I know I arrived when the repeal was still going on, because here's what happened. I became a group of, part of a group of about 12 Republicans, Charlie Dent, Fred Upton, myself, and others, the moderate, it was called Tuesday Groups, who went to leadership and said, no more repeal votes because you've promised a replacement plan and we don't have one. And understand, I got elected when the Obamacare rollout was very clunky, and frankly, people were greatly concerned about it. So I was elected in that cycle where we were trying to slow down Obamacare. I own that. But this is a place also where I have grown. Look, even in Congress, over those 3 years, I became an advocate for Medicaid expansion. I think Florida needs to expand Medicaid. We're only one of 10 states who haven't. It is denying health care, affordable health care to families who need it. And it also would be a return to the treasury of the state of Florida. It's a net revenue raiser given the current formulas. And so I support Medicaid expansion. And look, I think the healthcare market has broken. The private healthcare market has broken. And I think there's a role for government to step in and support Medicaid expansion, but also support the delivery of healthcare to families who need it. In Florida, over 40% of childbirth care comes from Medicaid. We know skilled nursing and long-term care and end-of-life care is supported by the Medicaid program, and families who need it because of their own finances need it. It is a moral wrong that Republicans in Tallahassee continue to stand in the way of delivering affordable health care to Florida's families.
Congressman, let me ask you, you mentioned a lot of people jumping onto your campaign. I was having dinner with Marianne Farring from Mise en Place last night, and, she was appointed to a tourism board by Barack Obama, supported his campaign. She's very excited about your candidacy. But the last time I heard you on this station was in May on Dingfelder's program, Down and Dirty, and Kelly Benjamin called in, and he had some words to say about your work with Bill Young, who in 2000, this is a Get a Job thing from 2012, and he was talking about this press conference he arranged for this young man that approached Bill Young, and then Bill Young told him to get a job. I know you're super proud of the work you did with Bill Young. 43 years he represented Pinellas. Benjamin's argument was that voters shouldn't trust you because of an incident like that work that you were doing for Bill Young. You responded that people are either going to have to trust you or not, and that will be a personal decision. But really, how do you win the trust of people who really are skeptical, who've seen you, work for someone who was not for a living wage and things like that? How do you plan to do that as this race kind of heats up?
Well, I would ask them to not define me by 20 years ago or 12 years ago, but watch my journey over the last 10 years. I mean, I think for every one person with that concern, there's probably a dozen that have watched my journey, particularly on MSNBC, and have seen me defend Democratic values at times with greater passion than some Democrats have. I mean, I joke, the first time I was on with Claire McCaskill, I think I reached across the table and pounded my fist and said, I'm more of a Democrat than you are right now, because I was arguing Pelosi should do more to impeach Trump, and Claire was saying, pump the brakes a little bit. So look, that's probably my comment when I was on with John. Eventually voters are going to have to make a decision. I have probably been more transparent and open in my political journey than any politician I know. I mean, look, the question on choice and other issues where Charlie Crist would say, I never left the party left me. I don't try to hide the ball. I don't think any of us believe Charlie. I mean that respectfully to Charlie. I really do. I'm not trying to ding him. I am honest and open and transparent about my journey. I left the Republican Party. I changed. I've grown. And I test that question in politics. Is it okay to change your mind in politics? And I think the answer is yes. I think it should be. I think most of us have. And ultimately, voters get to make that determination. I feel very good about where we are in this campaign. Look, politics is hard. I know there are a lot of hurt feelings. If people want to hold on to something 12 years ago, God bless them. That's their choice. It's not mine.
And when you look at somebody like Mom Downey running in New York, kind of showing maybe a playbook for Democrats, we don't know what's going to happen in that race. But how far to the left do you think you're willing to go to embrace, some quote unquote really progressive ideals like that?
Yeah, look, you know what I learned in the independent space? I reject the left-right spectrum altogether. I think people want big solutions to big problems. Sometimes those answers are on the left, sometimes they're in the middle, sometimes they're on the right. Look, I think we need a state catastrophic fund to take hurricane coverage out of the private market and instead make it a peril fully covered by the state. Republicans will call it socialism. They did when I introduced the National Cap Fund. I just call it cheaper insurance. I don't care what you call it. I think we need to expand Medicaid. Does that mean the government has more of a role? Sure, of course it does. I think we need to focus on crime, not fighting communities, but fight crime. Does that make it a progressive principle? Maybe. I also think lower taxes ultimately do contribute to economic growth, but we have to be Democrats who recognize we still need revenue. That doesn't mean no taxes like Republicans are proposing. Look, I think capitalism and fair capitalism lifts everyone up, and we're going to be the party that recognizes that, but says if your personal economy gets disrupted, we're going to make sure you have access to secure housing and health care, the ability to get back on your feet. Instead of falling and hitting the pavement, you're going to get caught by a safety net. I think we need more gun violence prevention legislation. I don't care if you say that's left, right, or middle. I really don't. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice by trying to say, where on the left-right spectrum are you? I think the right question is, do we have bold solutions to big problems? Look, Mamdani won because voters across the country are screaming that there's an affordability crisis. They are telling us there's an affordability crisis that our legacy incumbent politicians aren't listening to or addressing, and he was. And the reason that we have this race as close as we do within just a few months already is because we're talking about the affordability crisis every day, reducing the cost of access to housing for renters, for homeowners. We're talking about reducing utility costs by bringing in clean and renewable energies, by building more multimodal public transportation instead of highways that require you to pay a $10 toll. If we are talking about Florida solutions to Florida's problems, then a Democratic coalition, hopefully led by David Jolly, has a chance to win next November because we're meeting voters where they're at. That's what Mamdani did in New York. He just had different solutions for that jurisdiction.
And if you're just tuning in right now, that is the voice of David Jolly. He is a Democratic candidate for governor in Florida in 2026. You're listening to The Skinny right now here in WMNF, 22 minutes past the hour here in Tampa. I'm Mitch Perry along with Ray Roa. David, let's talk about the race going forward. Byron Donalds is, of course, the leading Republican candidate right now who maybe you might be facing in the general election next year. He's raised an extraordinary amount of money right now, over $20 million. If you look at his political committee, I believe you raised roughly around $1 million. That obviously does not augur well moving forward. How are you going to be able to move up those numbers?
No, I'm great with it. Look, Donalds has been in 4 or 5 months. We've been in 6 weeks. That $1 million number came after we had been a candidate for 3 or 4 weeks. And also, let's have some perspective on this. Donalds, I think, raised $7 million this last quarter from 3 sources. He's taken a $5 million contribution, several $1 million contributions, I believe, and he is Trump's handpicked candidate in the home state of MAGA, and a state where everyone believes Republicans have a generational lock. So the fact that we got in and excited donors from all 50 states, I believe 12,000 unique, or maybe not unique, but 12,000 individual contributions. I feel very good about the energy behind this, and I am not going to play the money expectations game this year. Money will follow the polls. Look, I am leaving it all on the field in communities across the state. I am on the road virtually every day. I'm going to Democratic strongholds. I'm going to Republican strongholds. I'm going to places Democrats haven't gone, and we're seeing the polls move. As the polls move, the money will be there. I have my own internal benchmarks for this year, and frankly, for February of next year, I know where I want to be between cash on hand and polls, and we're going to get there. And I can promise you this, they will outspend us 2-1, maybe 3-1. But by next summer, if we have the polls within 5 points or lower, and I know we will, we'll win this race, Mitch. We'll win it because the money will follow the polls and people will realize we have a generational opportunity to flip Florida and to beat MAGA in its home state, and it will change national politics when we do that. So I am excited about the money that's already coming in, but this race, look, no amount of money can stop a movement. My job as a candidate is to build a movement. I believe it's there and ready to go.
Let's talk about immigration. Governor Ron DeSantis held a press conference this morning from what is known as Alligator Alcatraz down in South Florida. Of course, extremely controversial. But the issue of immigration, one of the biggest issues, of course, in last year's election, and Donald Trump came in, letting people think with that, a capacity to go ahead with quote unquote mass deportations. Of course, it's kind of gone, some people would say, gone beyond that at this point. But where are you on this? Because I know, obviously, Governor Ron DeSantis is more to the, very far right side on this. I know that some people, I guess the question is, obviously, it's gone beyond arresting people who are simply who have a criminal record, right? There's a lot of people who just are legally their status is not they're not legal citizens here. But so where would you go on that? I mean, the governor, of course, has gone well beyond many other states in this country. We deputized, made sure that every sheriff in this state has an agreement with ICE to go detain. Where are you at on this?
Yeah, so let's start with top line. As the detention center in the Everglades exists because of Ron DeSantis' emergency order, I would rescind that emergency order on day one. We would shut down the facility in the Everglades. The second thing, I think we have to, if I have one opportunity in this race to contribute to the national dialogue, it would be around this. Republicans have gotten away with conflating immigration and crime, and it's gross and it's wrong and it's cruel. We can be a state and we should be a Democratic Party that's tough on crime, but lifts up communities. Republican leadership right now is fighting communities, not fighting crime. They're fighting communities and go looking for crime. I think we should return to the original Republican language of creating a pathway to legal status for people to work. If they have not committed a crime, if their only offense is that they're in the United States working a day's labor to try to put food on the table for their kids, create opportunity for their young kids to learn English and be a part of the American economy, God bless them. That's exactly who we want here. We want to celebrate people who are contributing to our economy and our culture. Now, if someone has committed a crime, certainly repeated crimes, get them out of here. We do need, tall walls but wide gates. We need border security, but we also need to be of generous spirit. And this is not unlike, for people who've been in Florida a long time. Look, I grew up in Miami in the 80s. I was born in Pinellas. We moved to Miami in the mid 70s. And after the Mariel boat lift, the state and President Carter, frankly, in the 70s, but going into the 80s with Reagan, they were wrestling with what do we do with this influx of immigrants. And finally, the mayor of Miami stood up and said, and look, folks, they were housing migrants in the Orange Bowl. They fenced off the Orange Bowl, the football stadium in Miami. They were housing migrants there. It was not unlike a little bit of what we're seeing now. This debate was raging, and the mayor of Miami finally said, if we turn our backs on people who are just seeking freedom in the United States, we might as well get rid of the Statue of Liberty. And I think we're right back there. We're having this debate all over again. So people understand cruelty and broken promises. Picking up a parent who's just taking their kid to school or who's complying with their immigration officer, or raiding a 6th grade graduation to send parents running away and leaving their kids on stage. It's cruel. It's cruel. It's a moral cruelty, and it's wrong. We will be a state, if I have the opportunity to lead, that fights crime but not communities. We will shut down the detention center in the Everglades.
That is the voice of David Jolly. He's a Democratic candidate for Florida next year. Again, I'm Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe. You're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 1129. In a few minutes, we'll be speaking with Mike Gordon, former federal prosecutor who was recently fired by Attorney General Pam Bondi. But still a few more minutes with David Jolly, the candidate here. David Jolly, yesterday, Ron DeSantis said that he thinks it's appropriate to redistrict congressional districts in Florida under basically because I think Donald Trump is worried that the Democrats might take over the House next year. Yeah. We heard it first in Texas, and now other states or Republican states apparently are, and maybe even Democrat states, right? It could get wild here. But what were your thoughts about what you heard when DeSantis said yesterday?
We need a nonpartisan redistricting commission in the state of Florida like other states have. Look, my 6 years trying to organize the independent space, it's very much focused on electoral reform and democracy reform. Gerrymandering reform, public financing of campaigns, ballot access for candidates, increasing access to the ballot box for voters, even open primaries in some cases. And so we need a nonpartisan redistricting commission in the state of Florida. Look, it's true at the federal level, but it's true at the state level. The supermajority in Tallahassee has been created by gerrymandering. The outsized Republican majority in Congress has been created by by gerrymandering. It is wrong what Ron DeSantis wants to do, but he gets away with it because the Republican legislature lets him.
I asked you this for a story I wrote last week, but of course, there's a debate within the Florida Democratic Party right now about having open primaries. Where do you stand on that?
I will support whatever the Democratic Executive Committee decides on this. My job as a candidate is to win over independent voters, and I think independent voters want change just as much as Democrats want change right now. I mean, the independent voter is very much a change voter. And so, look, my job is to try to bring those voters into our coalition, hopefully into our party. I'm going to be speaking to independent voters and, frankly, disaffected Republicans every day for the next 16 months. I want them in our coalition. I will leave it to the Democratic Party Executive Committee what they decide to do on the primaries. I'll support whatever decision they make.
Congressman, earlier this year, the ACLU of Florida filed a suit on professors' behalf in regards to SB 266, basically the law limiting, DEI initiatives, saying that it harmed professors' ambitions. If you become the governor, how will you approach things like accreditation, general education, and funding for anything on campuses that might be deemed woke?
Get the politicians out of our university system, out of our schools, let teachers teach, take the handcuffs off, bring the books back. One of the things you can do at the university level as governor is immediately fire all of Ron DeSantis' appointees to the state university system, to our college boards, frankly, to our water district boards, to the Public Service Commission. Bring back people that believe in data and science and math and diversity and understand enrichment and understand how to create people, students who are prepared for the real world and understand that institutions in the state of Florida should look like our state. And so I am not afraid of saying that we need to ensure we have diversity across our state institutions, starting with our universities, and we need to have curriculum that challenges people. Look, we have a 6 and 4-year-old, right? And we belong to a fairly conservative Christian church, as I mentioned. We're people of deep faith. I can separate that from my politics, but I introduced that background for this reason. I want my 6 and 4-year-old to be exposed to the most incredible amount of diversity, differences in cultures and life, to understand that people love different people, that people come from different countries, that we have different skin colors, regardless of where we are, we're all part of the same community. I want my kids to be challenged through curriculum and academia and teachers. And at home, we can orient our family around the value set that's right for our kids and prepare our kids to make their own decisions when they reach the age of majority. I'm not intimidated by diversity and equity and inclusion. I think it should be celebrated because we need state institutions that look like our state. And so I think Republicans are trying to fight a culture war and simply divide us. I think it's time to end the culture wars, return to a place where everyone across this state is welcome and celebrated and lifted up. That includes in our faculty, but that also includes in our curriculums.
David Jolly, I wanted to ask you this, and probably be our last question with you, and that is, you're of course now a new Democrat, as it were, whereas the Democratic Party, not only just in Florida, which has been in crisis for many years, but nationally, right, after last year's losing the popular vote to Donald Trump, losing both chambers in the United States Congress. You can't go anywhere these days without reading Democrats kvetching basically about what went wrong and what it's going to take to bring them back to prominence, if not in 26 and certainly in 2028. James Carville the other day said that the Democratic Party is steamrolling towards a civilized civil war. My question to you is, as the party deals with this and tries on certain issues maybe to look at themselves as like maybe out of the majority, the mainstream on certain issues, what have you, you're coming in now trying to, of course, prove yourself to Democratic voters, of course, and the Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, it's not all, pure liberal people. There's different variances of where people are on the political spectrum here. So I guess the question is, I know your positions are, where you're at right now, but you're coming in a really interesting, and for Democrats would say a really negative time right now. But so can you explain what it's like for you to stay with what your true beliefs are as you watch the party itself try to figure where they're going?
Look, I actually think this is a very rational, unified Democratic environment. I mean that. I've probably had 20 town halls. Let's say I've been to 40 or 50 towns. Democrats are unified around core messages and winning. And so I would say two things to Democrats. First, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype that we're being told we are divided. But secondly, it's up to us whether or not we're divided or unified. And here's where I think we are absolutely unified, not just as a party, but as a coalition that reaches independents and disaffected Republicans. I lead every event we do by starting on 3 values. The economy should work for everyone, not just the rich and the reckless. The economy should work for everyone, lift up everyone. The government actually has a role in people's lives. It should provide services to our seniors, to our veterans, to Florida's families in need of public education, to victims of crime, to people who need protection from climate change. The government actually has a role. So the first value is the economy should work for everyone. Second is the government should serve its people. And the third is we should be a state and, frankly, a country where everyone is welcome and lifted up, regardless of the color of your skin, where you were born, who you love, or who you worship. Those are 3 values that unite all Democrats and unite independents and, frankly, Republicans who will pay attention. Those are American values. Those are Florida values. Those are Democratic Party values. I don't think Republicans could say they agree with those values. Elected Republicans right now, they're not fighting for an economy for everyone. They're trying to shut down the government, and they're trying to divide us with culture wars. Those aren't their values. Those are our values. And so Democrats are united. We really are. And I don't think we need to buy into the hype of those who say we are so divided. Of course, we will have family conversations. People want to go in one direction or another. But look, on those values, I think Mandami is probably fighting for those values in Manhattan. His solutions are different than the solutions I'm offering to Florida. But the values of an economy that works for everyone, the government serving its people, and a place where everyone is welcome, those are consistent across the country. Those are the values I'm fighting for, and I think Democrats are united around them.
David Jolly, thank you so much for joining us here on The Skinny.
You got it.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. David Jolly, again, the Democrat, the only major candidate right now running for the Democratic nomination for governor. Okay, Ray, we're going to transition now to our next guest here in studio, and that is Mike Gordon. Mike Gordon has served as a United States attorney, assistant attorney in the Middle District of Florida from 2017 up until 4 weeks ago, when he was fired by his boss, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Mike Gordon, thank you so much for joining us here in the WNF studios.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great to have you here with us. Mike, first question, very basic. Why were you fired?
I think that's been made pretty obvious, unfortunately. I was fired because I prosecuted January 6th cases, specifically some of the most high-profile rioters amongst the January 6th defendants. I did that for 2 years, and I did it well. I was promoted up to the level of senior trial counsel. So in that role, I was responsible not only for some of those high-profile cases and trials, but also training other prosecutors, getting other people up to speed, supervising other trial teams, and making sure that they were ready to convince a jury that folks were guilty, and that's what the jury's determined.
Yeah, and you said you were part of what they call the Capitol Siege section. You were volunteered for this, so tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tampa back in 2017. I was hired under the Obama administration, but the first 4 years of my career were under the Trump administration. My first 4 years, I worked in our violent crime and narcotics section. I did drug dealers, fentanyl suppliers, opioid overdose deaths. I did big gang cases, shootings, robbery strings, those kinds of violent crimes, things that are sort of right down the middle of every administration's priorities. COVID hit. We were all working from home, essentially. Court was mostly by Zoom. So January 6th, 2021, I'm working from home. I have the TV on the background, and I see, as we all did, I see the January 6th riot unfold. And it was as shocking to me as it was to anyone. But 2 parts of my brain clicked on at once. Before I was ever a lawyer, I was a high school teacher. So I did that for all my 20s. So the history teacher part of my brain kicks in and realizes I'm watching something historic. It happened right in front of me. This is going to be in my kids' history books. And so I'm glued to that. The other part of my brain is the prosecutor part. And I'm realizing as I'm watching it in real time, I am watching crime happen. I'm watching the biggest crime scene, not only I think in my career, in the nation's history. So both those things are triggered simultaneously. And I also remember the words of one of my mentors when I started at DOJ, who told me, you're now in the job where you've probably thought your whole life when you've seen something wrong, you've thought to yourself, someone should do something about that. Well, guess what? You're now the someone. You can and should do something about it. So all those things triggered together, and I think I need to do something about this and be part of it. So the next day, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. started the process of identifying who those rioters were and prosecuting those cases. And they quickly realized they were overwhelmed. There were too many cases for the D.C. office to handle alone. So they sent up a nationwide request for volunteers to help. I raised my hand, but so did many, many others. And so many people volunteered that they actually had to make it a competitive application process to join that specialized unit. I was selected, and then for the next 2 years, that's what I did. I prosecuted high-profile January 6 rioters.
Now, did you do this in Tampa or in D.C.?
So I still mostly worked remotely from home in Tampa, and it flew back and forth to D.C. as necessary for hearings, trials, important meetings, whatever it was. I was probably on the road a couple times a month.
Now, you have said, I believe I read this somewhere, I know you've done a lot of interviews in the last couple of days here, that, what was it, Ed Martin, okay, the weaponization working group was behind your firing, and that's being led by Ed Martin, who for a brief time was an interim U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C. in the first few months of the Trump administration this year. He's made a lot of news if you follow that. So tell us more about that.
So let me be clear on that. That is my speculation. Okay. That's what I think. But I don't know, because all I know about my firing, all I know is the one-page letter that I got, right? And that's actually really, really important. So the law for civil servants like me, law for government employees, is different than it is for sort of regular folks in the workforce. And I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding this because they think to themselves, well, hey, I can get fired at my job for any reason, right? My boss can just decide to fire me. Big deal. So a federal prosecutor got fired. So what? But the reason why it's a big deal is because there are these special laws. They're called civil service protection laws. And the idea behind them is that there are millions, literally millions of people who work for the government who are not political. They serve under Democratic and Republican administrations. These are the folks who get the day-to-day work of the government done. People like prosecutors, because criminal law doesn't change depending on who's in the White House. And that's what our job is, right? If something happens, you gather the evidence, you compare it to the law, and if you follow the case wherever the facts in the law lead. Doesn't matter who is sitting in the White House. Top-level people, political appointees, those change over, right?
Yeah.
And so priorities change, allocation of resources change, but the day-to-day work doesn't. At least it's not supposed to. And for that reason, civil servants like myself have a protection of the law where you cannot fire us for no reason at all. You can't fire us at will. We can only be fired first if there's a merit-based justification for cause, is what it's called, and you have to first give us a warning, right? Timely in advance, let us know what the problem is and give us an opportunity to argue against it. So the Trump administration did none of that with me. All I got was this one-page letter from Attorney General Bondi that didn't cite a cause at all, let alone a merit-based one. And it was given to me minutes before I was escorted out of the office.
Right.
Yeah, so Pam Bondi's name is on that letter. She's from Tampa, too. Can you give us some insight on whether,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure to tell our listeners again, we're talking to Mike Gordon. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney based here in Tampa who was terminated by Pam Bondi, as we were talking about 4 weeks ago. And so go ahead.
What was her relationship? Did you know her back here in Tampa or anything like that? Do you think she knows who you are or anything like that? I mean, clearly she does, but talk about that.
So I don't. I've never met Pam Bondi in my life. We have a lot of sort of mutual acquaintances because we're both in the criminal law world here in Tampa. So she knows a lot of the same defense attorneys that I do. But no, I've never met her. I've never interacted with her. And again, this is my speculation, but I suspect she has no idea who I am.
Right.
She might now, given the news. I think someone else identified me as someone for political revenge or political retribution, put my name in a letter, put it on her desk, and she probably signed it.
You mentioned a moment ago about civil service protections. What we have seen, Mike Gordon, is that since Trump got in January, is so many workers have been fired from the federal workforce. We've never seen it like this. Of course, you had DOJ earlier on, but we've seen these widespread cuts in so many different departments. USAID, one of the most famous ones in terms of helping out internationally. And we know we've seen reports of lawsuits filed by other employees as well. When it comes to prosecutors, and there's no question about it, as you talked about, you went after, that was your job there. And so were you shocked? Let me ask you this. This is like a leading question. Were you surprised? What did you think when Donald Trump came in his first day in office and pardoned all of those people who were involved in January 6 activities?
No, I was absolutely shocked. I had been based on his campaign rhetoric, right, for the year leading up, I expected him to pardon some January 6 rioters, maybe even many. But amongst the 1,500-ish people who were convicted for January 6 crimes, hundreds of those, over 400, committed assaults on police officers. So as much as Donald Trump had campaigned on many issues, one of the things he had done is he had hugged the law enforcement, right? He had said that he backs the blue, he's a big supporter of law enforcement. So I never thought that he would pardon people who were either convicted of or had pled guilty to assaulting law enforcement officers. I thought that there was no way he would do that, not just because it was wrong, right? Not just because it was morally, ethically wrong to do that, but also because I thought that would, at least politically, inflame his base. I thought that would be an important part of support for him. And I don't think I was the only one who thought that, because even J.D. Vance, when asked that question after the election, but before inauguration, said that he did not think that the president was going to pardon.
Well, there had been reporting that basically because there were so many people that basically they were going through it, individually, and it's like, oh, screw it, just do all of them, because that makes the most sense, whether it's true or not. But, right. So I wanted to get your take on that. One of the people you prosecuted, I noticed a name, I'm not as familiar with some people following all these different cases, but Ray Epps was one of these people. And Ray Epps, Tucker Carlson basically said, this is the guy, inside job, what have you. This guy's life was made hell, but talk about what did he actually do? What did you find him charge him with there?
Yeah, and I'll say that Ray Epps was one of the most extensively investigated January 6 rioters for exactly this reason. It was such a high-profile case, and it was important for us to get it right. So we were able to, by the use of cameras and other things, to follow most of Ray Epps' path over the course of the day. And what Ray Epps did is the night before January 6th, and this is important, the night before, he got in a crowd of people, and when people were talking about what they needed to do, what they should do the next day, he yelled out that we should storm the Capitol. I'm going to mess up the verbatim quote of what he said, but he essentially said, we've got to, our problem isn't here, because people were fighting with each other. He said, our problem is not with each other. Our problem is over there. It's in the Capitol, it's with Congress. Like, we've got to go to the Capitol. Tomorrow we've got to go to the Capitol. And people in that group started shouting him down. All right, telling him, oh, you're a Fed. And okay, let me be clear. Mm-hmm. Ray Epps has never been a Fed. Yeah. He was never a federal law enforcement officer, ever. That is still a conspiracy that is out there. It was not true. So the next day, he's walking around the rally on the Ellipse, and when it ends, he's encouraging people to march on the Capitol.
Okay, yeah.
When those folks who were sort of marching on the Capitol, when they got to the first barricade that was manned by police, there was a moment where the people there were stopped, and they were sort of arguing with the police. There's only 3 officers there manning this barricade. And the barricade was just bike racks, right? It's just metal bike racks. And someone's shaking a barricade, and Ray Epps goes and whispers in one of those guys' ears, right? A few seconds later, that guy, along with others, helps rip down that bike barricade and charges into the Capitol. And that's the centerpiece of this conspiracy theory is like, Ray Epps is a Fed who's behind all of this, and he goaded that guy into doing that, which is not what happened. Yeah. Not the guy who did the barricade. He said that what Ray Epps told him was basically calm down. Ray Epps told him to calm down. There was no evidence otherwise.
Again, that's the voice of Mike Gordon. He is a former U.S. assistant attorney here working in the Middle District of Florida. He was fired by Attorney General Pam Bondi 4 weeks ago. He has just filed, along with 2 other prosecutors, Patricia Hartman and Joseph Terrell. Did the 3 of you, I guess, were fired the same day? Is that correct, 4 weeks ago?
No, so you're mixing up a couple people.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So there were 3 prosecutors fired on the same day, on June 27th. Myself and then 2 others, one based and both who were based in D.C., not here. The Patricia Hartman and Joseph Terrell. Patricia Hartman was the press officer for the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, the press liaison.
Yeah.
And then Joseph Terrell was the chief ethics advisor within DOJ to the top officials like Pam Bondi. They were fired a few weeks after me.
They are part of the lawsuit, though.
Yes.
That you
They
filed
filed
yesterday.
lawsuit.
Yeah, so the three of us together,
Okay.
we have three different positions, right? We've got former prosecutor, former press officer, former ethics officer, but we're all filing, arguing that we were all entitled to those same civil service protections, and the government just didn't follow them. And that's, Mitch, I got to say that, like, that's what's so incredible about this case, and what's so upsetting, and what I think people should be angry about, is the Department of Justice is the part of the government charged with enforcing the law, right? And in DOJ, we're told all the time, it's Congress that decides what the law is. Your job is to enforce it. You think the law should be something different? Lobby your congressperson, right? But as prosecutors, as agents, that's not your job. Your job is to enforce the law as it is. Okay, the laws on the books are crystal clear about the procedures that have to be followed to fire federal employees who are protected by them. Crystal clear. It's not a gray area. And here, the DOJ has just completely ignored the law and fired us amongst hundreds of others.
You mentioned in that lawsuit, it says in a normal course of proceedings, plaintiffs would be able to seek recourse through the Merit Systems Protection Board, but because of the government's own actions, any complaint filed before the MSPB will be futile.
That's right. So the MSPB is a small administrative agency, and the way this is set up is a fired federal employee, if they got their warning like they were supposed to, then they ended up getting fired anyway, supposed to be able to appeal that firing to this executive branch, sort of small quasi-judicial agency. If you lose there, then you can appeal regularly to a federal court. That's the normal way it's supposed to happen. But the MSPB has a 3-member board, and they have to have 2 of those 3 in place to have a quorum, to have enough people to actually function. Well, the Trump administration, when it came in, it fired 2 of those 3 people, leaving only 1 in place. Well, there's no quorum, so the MSPB can't function. On top of that, the MSPB, there's not that many cases that happen in a typical year, right? But the Trump administration has come in and gone scorched earth with, just firing hundreds of federal employees. And so not only is there no quorum, but even if there was, there's now over 2,000 applications pending in front of the MSPB that are waiting. So what the administration has done is they've ignored due process on the front end, and then they've kneecapped it on the back end. So not only do you not get your due process rights recognized, but then the very means you're given to try to litigate and assert those rights has been rendered inoperable.
How helpless do you feel? When you talk to regular people about this, they maybe feel compelled to do something or anything like that. But obviously this is in the courts. Everyone's going to wait. We're going to watch this. But what do you tell people when they feel, just shaken up by what's happening here? And how helpless do you feel actually in this case? I mean, you do have a lawsuit out, but you're standing by.
I so appreciate that question, because I don't feel helpless at all. That's why I'm sitting here with you right now. I have been essentially a professional fighter on behalf of the government for my whole legal career. Now I'm on the other side of that, right? I'm fighting against the government. I have been standing up in court for 8.5 years, and I start by saying, Your Honor, Mike Gordon for the United States. Now my name is on a federal lawsuit where it's Mike Gordon v. against the United States, which is a bizarre place to be. But I'm not helpless, because I can get up here and I can not only file that lawsuit, but I can speak to you. I can go on TV. I am trying to shout from every rooftop I can find about the fact that, to me, what's going on right now to our justice system is the Trump administration is walking around the House, dousing it with gasoline and playing with matches in the corner. And we have all got to stand up and shout from the rooftops before that match gets lit and the House goes up in flames.
Now, the U.S. Attorney here is Greg Kehoe, right? He was recently appointed to that position. What are your thoughts about him under this? And how many employees do you work in the Middle District? What's morale like, I guess? Yeah. A couple of questions there.
Yeah, so first, about U.S. Attorney Kehoe. He is fantastic, right? And I want to make that crystal clear. He was a AUSA before, earlier in his career, then was a sort of prominent, highly respected defense attorney, and now is coming leading this office. And he has done a fantastic job leading that office. He was as blindsided as I was. No one picked up the phone from D.C. and called him and said, hey, we're thinking of firing Mike Gordon. Is this guy any good? What's he like? What kind of cases is he working on? Is he an important part of your office? That call wasn't made. And I know what kind of answer U.S. Attorney Kehoe would have given if asked. The office felt great about his leadership and still does. But morale within the office with respect to DC is in a bad place right now. After I was fired, and I was fired after 8.5 years of outstanding performance reviews every year, after becoming one of the go-to people for complex cases. And so everyone's asking themselves, okay, well, am I next? Right? And asking questions we don't want prosecutors asking, such as, well, the facts and the law say that I should charge this case, but is this going to be something the president wants? Am I going to get fired for this down the line? Right? Nobody in your audience, nobody in the country should want prosecutors thinking about anything other than where the facts and the law go. Because when we lose that protection, right, we all lose the protection of the justice system.
One of the cases that you were working on was the prosecution of Leo Govoni. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, correct.
Govoni, a St. Pete man accused of stealing over $100 million from medical trust funds meant to help individuals with disabilities, injured workers, and retirees across Florida. In a statement, Congresswoman Kathy Castor, writing to the Attorney General Bondi, saying this, just should be reversed, this termination of you. She wrote, quote, "These funds managed by nonprofits Govoni helped fund were systematically siphoned into shell companies and fraudulent investment vehicles, allegedly to support his lavish personal lifestyle. Victims were blindsided when their accounts were drained, leaving them without the resources they relied on for housing, therapy, medication, and basic dignity. The victims of Govoni's alleged fraud number in the thousands, each with painful and personal stories. She says, I respectfully request that you stand up for the victims of the Govoni crimes, reinstate Mr. Gordon immediately, and allow the prosecution of Leo Govoni to proceed unimpeded. The victims deserve closure, and the public deserves a justice system free from intimidation and partisan retribution." So what's going to happen in the Govoni case?
It's going to be fine. Okay. There are many other talented prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tampa. And, one of those was tapped to take my place on the team. I was added to the team because I have a lot of skills, a lot of experience, and the capacity to do a case like that and do it well. But I'm not the only one, or I wasn't the only one in that office. And so the case is going to be fine. The people who are on it are good lawyers, and they will handle it well, I have no doubt. I'm, heartbroken that I will not be part of that and have the chance to get accountability for those victims. But I'm still angry for those victims because the message that was sent to them by DC is that we care more about political revenge than you. They didn't ask anyone, would the Govoni case be impacted by removing this prosecutor, right? Yeah. They didn't consult with victims. They didn't consult with with U.S. Attorney Kehoe or anyone else. So the administration is saying, we care more about making the president happy than pursuing justice. We care more about retribution than $100 million fraud against special needs victims.
Okay,
let me ask you. Okay,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We have a caller here. We're going to just take this caller. It says something about a January 6th prosecutor. I don't know if he's talking about you, but we're going to just take this. This is Aaron from Tampa. Aaron, you've been waiting patiently. You're on the air.
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah.
Hey, this is for the prosecutor there that was fired. If he showed a little bit more, if you wanted to prosecute crime and you're light. You were very light on crime. Your punishments towards these criminals were lax. So there's a reason nobody trusts you anymore because.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Aaron? What are you talking about? Do you know what he's? Yeah.
The reason why you were fired is because your lack of prosecuting heavy criminals, and you're very weak on punishment.
Okay, Okay, thank you. I thought that guy had something.
Yeah, let me ask you something, Mike. As a lawyer, you're working on this stuff. You had 17 cases out, I think 20 investigations, 6 trials, maybe, according to the Washington Post. Going back to the J6 stuff, you talked about watching it on TV as it was happening like everybody else, but spending that much time with that much evidence, how did it change you as a person?
So when I was a high school teacher, I taught, one of the novels I taught was The Lord of the Flies, right? And it's this parable about what happens on an island when just a bunch of kids, when all the rules go away. And the end of the story is they all become incredibly violent and end up killing, when the rules go up, people can turn into savages. That's
spoiler alert, people.
Right, exactly. And so that's just a parable, and it just speaks to humanity's dark nature. I watched that happen, right? I watched people that were otherwise upstanding citizens in their day-to-day lives who had never broken the law before. But when they were within a riot, within the permission structure of that, with seeing people to their left and their right assaulting police officers, some people join in. Folks that you would pass in the grocery store and never think that person would be a violent criminal, saw them, literally sort of trying to rip police officers' arms off their bodies. And so that can't help but make you a little cynical.
Mike Gordon, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you to our top of the show guest, David Jolly. Thank you to Skip Sassy on the boards for us today, Joe Remo on the telephone. I see E-Love in Studio One getting ready to cue up Art in Your Ear for you here on a Friday afternoon on behalf of myself and Mitch Perry. Thank you so much for listening to The Skinny. Thank you for your continued support of WMNF Tampa. Have a great weekend. Don't get in trouble.